All right. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining. This is a virtual event hosted by Interaction Design Foundation Chapter, Las Vegas. I'm the chapter leader. My name is Neha, and I am really excited and honored to host Nikki Anderson. She is also called the user research strategist. And I'm really excited to learn from her. So I'm not going to take too much time talking about everything else. I'm just going to give it away to her. And Nikki, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone who is joining us today, for your time and for being here. I always so appreciate it. Please feel free to pop in the chat and say hi, or ask any questions as well. I do promise that I will save time for questions at the end. Unfortunately, as a user researcher, I am horrible at time management, which is surprising because we're supposed to be good at time management, but I'm not one of those researchers, so I will do my best to get through everything and give time for questions if there are any. What I will go ahead and do now is just share my screen, and I am going to ask the never-ending question of, can everybody see my screen? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Amazing. Awesome. So, we are here today to talk about reactivity and proactivity in user research. And I am especially pleased to be talking about this subject because I find it to be an extremely important one, especially as an individual contributor, so an IC researcher, but really at any level, especially as we hear more and more and more about impact, and making sure that we're able to prove our value as user researchers. Really quickly, my name is Nikki. I have been a user researcher. It's 7 p.m. for me right now, so I do apologize if my English isn't as good as normal, although it is the only language that I speak, so I don't have much of an excuse. But I have been a user researcher for about 11 years now. I absolutely love user research, and I am a qual user researcher primarily, but I do dabble in the surveys occasionally. I'm obsessed with surfing, World of Warcraft, Pokemon, and Stephen King, as you might be able to see all my Stephen King books behind me, and that is the original 151 Pokemon. So super obsessed with those things. I don't have a surfboard, or it would probably be right back there. Not yet, at least. But today, today is W. So we'll pretend that stands for something. Today's wonderful uh, agenda is how to spot reactivity before it traps you. And we're going to go through a playbook of how to influence stakeholders, regardless of your role or level. And what I did for today's session is I made sure that there were a lot of to-dos, let's say, actionable items that you can take away. Neha, is this going to be sent to them, the slides, after?
The presentation is
Yeah.
being recorded. So yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm also happy to, if anybody wants access to these slides, feel free to ask as well. But there are quite a few like to-dos that I would recommend that you think about if you are interested in doing some of this work.
Yeah, we can definitely send the presentation as an attachment.
Perfect. Yeah. So just so that everything is there, you don't need to memorize anything and everything. And this is Poncho, my very cute dog. Uh, so let's get into reactivity, and the cost of reactivity. I'm curious if if anybody in here has ever been asked to just test this one thing quickly. Yeah, I see a hand raise. Feel free to put in the chat if that's something that you have experienced before. Um, yeah, just test this one thing really quickly. This is a thing that I have run into not only as a full-time researcher, but also still in my days as a consultant. And reactivity, yeah, it's all very simple. Just send this survey. That's a completely horrible. I get that a lot too. Um, that cost of reactivity, so that cost of constantly reacting to things that are coming towards us, means that we're tending to get endless requests, or research is being skipped. We might not get a seat at the table because we're constantly reacting to things. We're not able to kind of like prove the value of things, so we might feel undervalued, and ultimately it leads to a lot of burnout. And I am speaking from a very experienced space of having to literally take mental health leave for 4 weeks because I was so burnt out at one point in my career. And that was because one of those big reasons was because of reactivity. And why does this really happen to us? Um, we can feel like we have no control over the roadmap, and we're just trying to do our best to control what's going on. We might feel like there's this pressure to deliver things quickly, and we might be misunderstood. So, our craft of research might be misunderstood by product or by leadership. So, it's also what I got into is a lot of the times I was a solo user researcher, and I would be working across multiple teams, and I would have spent anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on how nice the team was to me, begging them to care about research and to like listen to me and to do research. So when they finally ended up being like, oh yeah, can we run this survey? Can we run this usability test? Can we just validate this? Can we just test this quickly? Can you run an unmoderated usability test so that we can get it done faster? Who needs interviews? Like all of these requests started coming in. I felt bad saying no because I had begged them to do this very stuff. And I was trying so hard to prove the value of research and to show people how impactful it can be that I actually ended up juggling way too much, saying yes to things that didn't make sense, which then made user research look quite bad in the end. And then I also, by saying yes to these things, I gave permission to my stakeholders that that's what user research was for, right? So user research was that just there for their validation and a big old pat on the back for their amazing idea that they came up with. So I perpetuated that misunderstanding quite a lot early on in my career. And ultimately, this all led and can lead to a lot of demotivation and disenchantment. So, a lot of that feeling of what's the point? I had a lot of that in the beginning of my career of like, why did you even bother hiring me? I used to do a lot more coaching. I do a lot less now. But when I was coaching user researchers like quite frequently, they shared that same sentiment of feeling very demotivated and very disenchanted with the role, when they were constantly being thrown things and feeling like they had to say yes. And I think that this is where that problem of reactivity really comes in, is when we are being reactive researchers, we're essentially stuck getting told what to do. And when you are told what to do so much, and for so much of your time is taken from of out of your time, so much of it is fielding requests and saying yes to things that might not be a good idea. You don't actually have a lot of time to be proactive. You don't have a lot of time to be actually shaping the strategic things that ideally your teams should be thinking about and the research that your organization ideally should be doing. And that's why it's really important to think about reactive research versus proactive research. And what I don't want to say today is that there is no space for reactive research. I think that there is space. But when we do react to research, we need to make sure that it's super clear and that it makes a lot of sense. And we need to be able to balance that out with proactive research. So these are our little to-dos. I have quite a few of these little cute brains working out. So one thing that I would recommend doing just to get started, and these are all things that you can do after the fact, is to map your last 5 research requests, and you can do more than that. But identify which ones were reactive versus proactive. So what were you told to do versus what did you actually shape and push forward from your side? So, for example, when I did this, I'm a huge fan of like looking back, retrospect, and like thinking through the past because that helps me identify where I've messed up and where I can do better and how I can improve. So, for instance, when I did this earlier on in my career, like everything was reactive. So that means that stakeholders were constantly coming to me saying, "Can you run this survey? Can you run this usability test? Can you do this? Can you do that?" And very few where I sat back and said, "Hey, we don't actually understand our users' unmet needs. We should do a study based solely on that." Or we have never gone through the product end to end. We like slice it up and do usability tests on this part and that part and that part, but we've never done a holistic benchmarking of our product. That's something that we should do, right? So, kind of like see if there's a balance at all between reactive and proactive. So let's talk through this playbook. I have quite a few steps in here. I have quite a few examples in here, as well as some things for you to do. Not homework because homework is boring, but better than homework. That will hopefully help you with putting these things into practice. So I'm going to take you through quite a few steps of what we can do to kind of spot reactivity and confront reactivity and move more into that proactive mindset. So the first thing is to really spot the trigger. So like what are the signs of reactivity? And it's usually that that whole question of can you just, it always starts with that phrase, oh, can you just test this, do this survey? Can you just do this really quickly? Another sign of reactivity is you're given a solution, not a problem. So can you please validate this solution? So like the team has worked completely on a project, and they've come to a solution, and you're just there essentially to say how awesome it is through the eyes of the user. Another one is timelines are fixed before research is scoped. So they're like, oh yeah, this needs to be done by X date, and like no research has been put into it. So that's a very reactive state because we're going to have to react to the work that they're doing. Um, and then success metrics are defined without any sort of like user input. So it has nothing really to do with like the user. So there's no kind of, let's say, on a prototype test, there's no kind of like completion metrics or task success metrics, or there's no kind of like, oh, we need to understand the top 5 pain points that people are feeling before we design a solution. So those are some triggers. And what I would encourage you to do is over the next 2 weeks, keep a short trigger log. You can do this longer depending on how many requests you get. But I would write down, and this is something I did. These are all steps that I have taken and have had to retake to make sure that I'm really sitting in a balanced state. But I have written down every reactive moment, and then I've looked through and said, okay, where could I have maybe intercepted this sooner? So, what was the actual trigger, and could I have intercepted that sooner? The next part is to really clarify the purpose of the research. So, reactive work, again, often starts with very vague requests, like, can you test this? Or can you interview a few users about this idea? Like, can you just, again, can you just? That should be like your biggest warning sign. The biggest red flag is that phrase, can you just? But oftentimes it is a very vague request. Like there's not a lot of, reason or intent behind it. And when we and I was very bad at doing this when I went into my research and I started just saying yes, okay, yes, I'll do that. Okay, yes, I do that. And then I would run headfirst into the research. I ended up sitting there not only unable to write a good interview guide because I really had no idea what I was trying to achieve, my interviews or my research was then like really loose and unstructured, and like I didn't really know the information that I should actually pull more at. And then lastly, when it came to the presentation, that was the worst part of it because I sat down being like, what am I supposed to say in this presentation? What am I supposed to put in this report? Because I actually don't know why we ended up doing this. I don't know why the team asked me. Whereas proactive research, even if somebody comes to you with a request, which is viewed as reactive, you can still have a proactive mindset about it. And you can really define the purpose of the research. So this study exists to help the team decide X by learning Y, right? So this is really putting together your research goals because you need to make the decision very clear, or the risk very clear before the study begins. So that means that you are defining essentially like why you are doing this work before you do the work. Because if we don't do that, we end up just saying yes to everything. We just have a whole mush of stuff that's not actually that impactful. And then that comes around to really bite us when we say, oh, we spent so much money on research. What did we actually find? Oh, not really anything. So it's a terrible, terrible cycle that I managed to get myself in. So really defining what the goals are and what decisions will be made from the team. So I actually used to just rely on research goals as my North Star for creating a research plan and an interview guide and as well as the report. But I also now am like, I ask teams like, what decisions will this help you make? You know, how will this move you forward? How will this move the team forward? How will this move any metrics that are important to you forward? So I have all that information beforehand, and then I can make a much more informed decision about the research. So just here is like the different like purposes that research can have, how it can help the team, and like an example framing question. Because I know not a lot of stakeholders are 100% great if you go to them and you're like, what are you trying to do? And they're like, I don't know. We're just trying to do research, right? So sometimes it helps to go with them by saying, okay, there are four main purposes for us to look at: decisions to inform, risk to reduce, assumptions to evaluate, or metrics to influence. Like, what are you feeling that this research is going to help you with? So because I found out that like just trying to ask stakeholders these things is not helpful when they don't know how to answer them. So now I try and go to stakeholders with these models if they are struggling. So I hope that that might help also with facilitating those conversations. And then I just have a few examples here where I talk through some studies that I have done. So a travel booking app team wants to introduce group trip planning. So instead of just being like, okay, let's just test this, or let's just validate that this is a great idea. Instead, you just want to write a purpose statement that makes it really, really clear as to why you're doing this plan and how it's going to help. So, the study exists to help the team decide whether travelers actually want to coordinate trips inside the app by learning how groups currently plan together and where the process breaks down, right? So, clear decision, the learning gap, so what you're trying to understand, and it's on evidence, not assumptions. Same here is more of a B2B. So a SaaS analytics platform plans to move advanced dashboards into a higher tier plan. Again, this study exists to help the team decide if gating dashboards behind a premium plan will cause adoption drop off by learning how trial users use analytics during onboarding and what data they consider essential. Again, based on that business decision, pricing exposes like a risk, so reduced conversion or adoption drop off, and it directly ties the learning goal to revenue, right? So this is really great because you're already starting to get at things that stakeholders tend to care about within your purpose statement. So if you were to create a purpose, if you were to be very proactive and create a study, I really highly recommend getting that information and making a purpose statement that is super compelling for your stakeholders. So big thing to do here is before accepting a research request, write that one line, write that purpose statement. And I would recommend, I know that it might be hard to do so. I know that I might be asking you to do the impossible, but if you can't fill in the blank, pause the work until you can. Because when we're just running research to run research, it looks really, really bad in the end, and we just end up stressing ourselves out and wasting time and money. So unless the purpose is extremely clear, press pause. Or put it in the backlog for later when the purpose is more clear and focus on very purpose-led research. The next step is to really reframe the ask. So essentially, this is about reframing questions, perception from executor to decision partner. So we want to, rather than only be seen as like somebody that executes on research or somebody that just like does the research, we want to be seen as a decision partner. Right. So, a lot of the times with reactive research, people come to you telling you something to do. They tell you to do an action. And rather than just taking that action, we want to say, hey, we're a part of this team. We're a part of this decision. We're a part of trying to make this all work. So, for instance, I always try and ask things like, what decision are we trying to make? What outcome would make this project a success? And what evidence do we already have? Right. So, you're not just there to just do research. You're there to sit and actually be a strategist and a partner with your stakeholders. So when they come to ask you to do things, we want to be seen as that decision partner. So we need to ask these kinds of probing questions to get that information from them so that they're like, oh, we can't just go to this person and ask them to run a survey. They're actually going to sit down and think through what the best framework, what the best methodology is. So, what I would recommend doing is trying to use one reframing question in your next stakeholder conversation, or in a few different ones in your subsequent stakeholder conversations, so multiple, and then track how it can change the discussion. Sometimes you will get pushback about like, oh, well, we don't have time to discuss this, or we don't have time. That's the primary one. And I always say to them, if we put in a little bit of time now, we avoid risking having to put in a lot of time later. So I try and showcase to them, okay, let's put in a little bit of extra time thinking about this, and I'm going to go as fast as possible. But if I have this information, I promise it will get us a lot more than if I just go and just do this without this context. The next one is to anchor to outcomes. So this is a chain that I use. So it's from going insight to decision to outcome to metric. So this is after you have done the research. You are kind of using this chain to help influence things that are actually done. So essentially, like what you want your stakeholder to do, because the amount of times that I've been asked to just test something and then nothing is looked at, or you go and do a presentation and you get like a thumbs up emoji, like it's the worst feeling in the world. So this is where it comes to like really making sure that your research is then tied to the outcome, and that you can do that by making sure that you have those conversations that we just talked about up front. So here you're linking together the insight, which is what you found, the decision, so that decision that needs to be informed and changed, the outcome, so what has changed because of that decision, or what could change if the decision is made, and the metric. So what kind of like metric comes from that? And I do promise that I'm going to show a whole slide that showcases things that if you don't have access to data that you can track. So I promise that is coming. But what I want to say here is, which is very important, is research impact is not necessarily about the volume of insights. It's about the alignment between user value and business value, right? So I used to just throw insights at my stakeholders, being like, this is what you asked for. Like, do this, do this, do this, or this is what we learned, this is what we learned, this is what we learned. And it was just like throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping that like one stakeholder somewhere would take one thing and actually do it. And I realized that the data overload and saturation was not ideal for my stakeholders. And I really, really, really was like, it's more about being able to showcase both the user value and the business value with the most important insights that are coming out of the study. And that's why that like the insight decision change or insight, decision, outcome, and metric chain is really important because it not only showcases that user side and where users would benefit, but also the business value. Here's a B2C example. So users not understanding premium plan benefits. The decision is to simplify the pricing page with value comparisons. And the outcome is 22% more upgrades in 4 weeks. And that outcome and metric are kind of like tied together. So we have what actually happened. And in here, insights, sales team skip tool setup because of their unclear permissions. So the decision is to add guided onboarding walkthrough. And then the outcome slash metric is average onboarding time drop from 14 days to 6 days, right? So it's very, very important for us to like showcase not just the insight. And I think that that's kind of where researchers freeze sometimes is just talking about the insight rather than the insight and the decision and then either the potential outcome or following up and seeing what the outcome is. Sometimes we get so busy reacting to research that we forget to follow up with our studies to see what the impact was. And I really recommend you going back and looking at studies and seeing what your impact was over time on some of these metrics because they are really important for you to track for your career. Um, something that you could do is mapping a recent project through this chain. Again, I'm a huge fan of doing things in retrospect. So looking at something that you had already done where maybe you just stopped at the insight or maybe you just stopped at the insight and decision, and really try and push yourself to go all the way with like the insight, the decision, the outcome, and like a potential metric, potential outcome and potential metric. Or this could be a really great opportunity for you to go back to some of your studies that you haven't followed up on and see, oh, actually, like we had this insight, what decision was made, what outcome happened, and what metric was tied to that. So that is a really great thing to be able to do, not only to get more comfortable with doing this, but also to make sure that you're going back and looking at what you accomplished so that when promotion time comes around, or pay rise time comes around, you have really clear outcomes for your research. And then again, translating outcomes to influence. So we can sometimes, it's funny because as researchers, we ask our participants all the time to be more specific. We're like, give me a specific example of how you were feeling, or give me a specific, memory or specific story or something, we're all about specificity. And then I can feel like in our reports, we actually tend to be quite vague, which might be because we're nervous about how stakeholders would react to our research, or we aren't sure how far we can push it. But we have a lot of like confusing and vague language that we can sometimes use. And I always recommend getting much more concrete about what happened. So users found it confusing. I have said this before many times. That doesn't really give the team anything to work with. We try and instead translate outcomes. So users found it confusing. We would want to say like 40% of people failed the task, let's say. Or we could translate it, users found it confusing, and we could say all the way to the outcome and to influencing things. Users found it confusing. We fixed it and we reduced task errors by 40%, right? So we want to be able to make sure that not only are we clear with what went wrong, but we're very clear with what we've influenced and impacted. So, like here, our prototype tested well. Okay, no, we validated a concept that saved 3 weeks of dev time. That's very different. And here are just a few more ways to look at that. So we ran 12 usability tests, which is great. We do need to tell them what we actually did, but even better, even stronger, that's more like outcome oriented, is we identified three blockers that caused 45% of the drop-offs. We created a new survey. Cool. How about we gathered data that cut decision time from 3 weeks to 5 days, right? We presented the findings. Okay, we did. But the outcome, what's the actual outcome? We helped this team prioritize 200,000 in dev savings, right? So making sure that our framing is not Like we can say the output, but we also, if we're going to say the output, we have to also say the outcome. So a little checklist to kind of go over. Um, Here is to really define the business and research goals before research begins. So we want all the goals and the decisions that need to be made, like really, really defined. And then during analysis, connecting the insights to decisions. So remembering like that chain. So insight and to decision. So what is actually going to be changed because of these insights? And then after the delivery, linking these changes to measurable shifts like your outcomes and impact metrics. So what actually changed because of the research and because of the insight, and then summarize every project with one sentence. Our research led to X decision, which produced X outcome. Right. So, being able to do that, you will save yourself a lot of time and energy. If you're able to do that at the end of your projects, and it might be multiple decisions and multiple outcomes, but you will be very successful in your career with just that one statement. When I started framing those, my studies in that way, I got a lot more buy-in, a lot more budget. I was able to grow the team, and I got a promotion, and I got multiple pay rises. And this also helps me a lot with as like a consultant as well, being able to like frame research in that way. So if you would like, you could do this retrospectively. So go through your project, your past projects, and say, can you write this line, right? So our research led to a decision which produced whatever business slash user outcome, right? So can you do that for your projects? And if not, can you push yourself to try and do that for your projects, your past projects? And then moving forward, is that something that you can write, even just like in your report? I'm a huge fan of actually like the kind of like upside down reporting, where you actually start with this and then showcase the evidence. So that's something that could be very interesting to try. And then we really want to make sure, let me just look at the time. Yeah, okay. We want to really make sure that impact is visible. So share your wins across multiple channels, Slack posts, recaps, readouts. Um, Try not to focus too hard on methods and rather focus on business results. Something that I stopped doing as much in my readouts is even putting like a project background slide in or slides into my report. They go into the appendix, and I actually start with like the three biggest takeaways and the consequences and risks, and then I go into the evidence of that. This is also something that I use a lot. You can feel free to steal these if you want. I have a Slack template for both evaluative and generative research. And this is like actual Slack messages that I send at the end of every study that I have, and just to like kind of like highlight the wins. And it's like very quick insights, some examples, and some recommended actions or fixes with the links, right? So it's actually a really great way to get product teams involved and to showcase how much you're doing. Even better if you put in here like the business impact. Um, but it just depends if you're able to do that or not. Um, Something that you could do for a few past research projects or any upcoming is write and post a 3 sentence impact update. So the user problem, the decision it informed, and the measurable effect. You don't need to go all wild with these. I just like these because I've used them for such a long time now and they've seemed really effective, but you could do it as like lean as the problem, the decision, and the measurable effect. Um, and I do understand that some of these things are not within your control. In fact, quite a few of them are not within your control. So I just wanted to talk through that because I have been at organizations where stakeholders ignored me no matter what, where I didn't have access to data, where I didn't have access to customers. I gotta love when people hire user researchers and then they're like, yeah, we can't let you talk to anybody. And you're kind of like, great, this is fun. Um, but there's a few things that you can do, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that I don't bring up in here. But you can set some proactive habits. These are some things that I have done in the past. So scheduling insight syncs per sprint. So before work begins, I actually go through for if I know a sprint is coming up on something, I schedule an insight sync beforehand and I say, this is all the data that we have. What are the gaps that we need to address? Right. So that's a very proactive way of pulling your information out of stakeholders, and then you are shaping the request rather than waiting for them to come to you. Write a monthly impact summary for leadership. This is something as simple as like all of the either the decision, the insight decision outcome metric chain is a really good thing to include in this impact summary. But you could also do like an executive summary on the top three like places of impact that research has had. Um, I pair every usability test with one discovery question. I used to do this, especially when I wasn't allowed to do generative research, because yes, I worked at organizations where that was not allowed. Asking a discovery question in usability testing that you want to ask, not that anybody's asked you to ask, that you think would be beneficial to ask is something that can really help you with getting into that proactive mindset. So let's say you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, we don't know anything about like our users' unmet needs, but like for some reason, nobody will let you do that study. Well, then in every usability test that you run for the next, 2 months or so, or every single session that you have for the next 1, 2 months, ask a question about like an unmet need or unmet needs in general. And then that's you identifying this is a gap that we have. I want to run this research and then gather that over time and present it. And then please block at least 10 minutes, I would say even 30 minutes a week to update an impact tracker. So where you actually track your impact. I'm happy to share my template with all of you if that would be helpful. But it is just so important for you to be knowing how impactful you are, even if because sometimes it just doesn't feel that way and we can't see it. So reflecting every week or every 2 weeks with this impact tracker can help you see really all the work that you are doing. And then here are a few things that you can do when you actually don't own the numbers. So again, I've worked at a lot of organizations where either I don't have access to data like metrics, or our metrics are such lagging indicators that I wouldn't even know. Like B2B can be very lagging indicator heavy, where like I would do research and I wouldn't know the results of that research for like 6 to 9 months, right? But there are still things for us to track of our impact. And these are some really, really great ones that I would recommend putting in your toolkit and just keeping track of. So, like, how much time does it take from somebody requesting to actually research, or, how many stakeholders are spending more time in research sessions? How many more generative research projects are you having? How many more workshops after projects, right? Or a drop in the time for recruitment. So I think that it's important for us to still think about all of these. And you can even go to like decrease customer support to calls or tickets. If you have the information, you can say like decrease in dev work, right? Get creative. There are a lot of ways for us to track our impact. Um, I also put this here because I knew we wouldn't have time for this. I was right. But we get a lot of like stakeholder lines of common pushback that we get from stakeholders. So we don't have time. We already know. We just need this. We'll figure it out later. Can you just write the survey? And I just like wrote a few ways that I try to combat these kinds of like awful things that I hear from stakeholders. Maybe if you are facing the same problems with stakeholders, always just saying, we don't have budget, we don't have time. Maybe these will give you some food for thought in speaking to stakeholders in a little bit more of a confident way, or feeling like you have a lot more agency. Because I know that a lot of things, if somebody says we don't have time for research, and even if you do your best to push back on that, you might not get it, right? And that's where it will come full circle, and you'll be able to say, "I told you so," later on in a very professional way. And yeah, that is what I have for us today. I'd love to hear if there's one thing in particular that you'd like to do this week. That I know it's Thursday, depending, or Friday, depending on where you are. And it might be Thursday night, so maybe you'll get to it tomorrow. Maybe you don't do anything on Fridays, which is totally fine. But yeah, I'd love to hear if there's one thing in particular that anybody would be interested in trying over the next week or so, to like put into practice. But I'm also happy to take the time now, which I actually did stop on time, to answer any sort of questions that anybody has for today. But thank you all so much. I hope that this was very, very helpful.
Extremely. I would love the impact tracker if you could share
Yes.
that.
Yes, I will go ahead and I will share the impact tracker. I can even bring it up and just throw it in the chat right now, for anybody who's interested, but I can also share it as a link after. So everybody who might be watching retrospectively can grab it as well. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, I promised to get the impact tracker.
I was wondering, how much more time does it take to do all of these other things that, like a retro or a tracking impact or any kind of things that are for ourselves? Because I think that is a huge challenge sometimes for me.
Yeah. So what I would say is some of the proactive things, taking the time to like clarify the research purpose, taking the time to, ask stakeholders questions in order to get their decision, in order to get any like metrics and clarity on any metrics. I would say that what while that feels like more time up front, it reduces the amount of time that the interview guide and research plan will take, and it also reduces the amount of time that you will sit there saying, "What do I put in this report?" So I have found it actually like makes research more efficient because I'm not sitting there hoping that I can somehow read somebody's mind to know what to put into the report. Um, but the whole thing where it's like tracking impact, and taking time to like put stuff in your impact tracker. I would say like I'm a huge proponent, and this is because I had the most amazing manager. Is he told us to block off like, you know anywhere from one, like I think it was like 1 to 2 hours a week. And in that 1 to 2 hours a week, he wanted us either to be like learning something new in our craft, or like craft adjacent. Like, so we would sit down and read books. Or he was like, you can like update things like, the work that you have done. So I am a huge proponent for doing these during work time. So saying to yourself, it's like going to the gym, or, keeping a commitment that is important to you. It could be the same as like, oh, well, I have a coffee every morning, because I need my coffee. Okay, well then take 10 to 15 minutes to just like update this impact tracker really quickly. I'm going to throw the impact tracker into the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah. And hopefully, like, I mean, like the whole thing, I feel like what takes the most time with some of these things, is actually coming up with the things that you should be tracking, or like coming up with the framework. But hopefully, you can all make a copy of this, and then this will take away that like mental load of having to create something. And if you feel like this is too much, don't use all of it, just use what you need.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. There's some conversation
Mm.
Um, Observer said, This was awesome. I've been telling you, young researchers just starting out, that they need to understand that if no one does anything with your research, it is not their fault, it is yours. Hard pill to swallow, but you have to get them to understand that you did and how it can help the business. To which Amber said, doesn't that conflict with what she said regarding companies that aren't going to pay attention to your work no matter what?
I would say that companies aren't necessarily not going to pay attention to your work no matter what. Um, but a lot of the reason that people don't pay attention to things generally, like, and this does not say, I'm not saying this about user research, but things generally is when they don't relate to them. So have you ever been, listening to somebody talk and you're like, why am I here? Why am I listening to this? This has nothing to do with me. It is a very human thing that we want relatability. We want something that's relevant to us. And especially in a professional and work context where we're all time poor, you're not going to get people's attention if you're not talking about something that's impactful or relevant or relatable for them. So I actually do agree that to a certain extent, if no one does anything with your research, it is partially your fault. Sometimes you just work with horrible people and it's not your fault. You could do everything under the sun to make it the best research ever, to make it so relevant, relatable. You could do backflips. You could pull out all the metrics, and some people just won't care because it's just not important to them, and that's okay, right? But I would say that you do have to. It's everybody's job in their job to make things relatable because your users are your stakeholders, right? So your users are not actually the external people that are using the software. Your users are your stakeholders because they are using your product, which is your research. So I think like from that standpoint, it's really important to really truly empathize with and understand what they care about so that you can bring them information that they want to listen to. Who wants to sit the number of times, all hands presentations,
Yeah.
they suck because what like you're sitting there being like this is super like it's just unrelatable, or if you like I don't know, watch a video where somebody's talking about something that you like I don't particularly love politics. So the second somebody is like bringing up really intense politics, I'm glazing over, right? Because they're just like I'm uninterested, it's unrelatable to me, right? The second you start talking about surfing, relatable. Start talking about Formula One, relatable, right? Like I like start talking about Pokemon, start talking about the original Pokemon, relatable. Start talking about the weird things that they put out now and call Pokemon, unrelatable, right? So like we do still have to make sure that we are bringing relatable and relevant information, or they're not going to care because why would they?
Yeah. I think that also brings up a good question that I've been mulling over, is like storytelling in terms of research presentations. Um,
Hmm.
I don't want to hog all the time. If somebody wants to come off mute and talk to Nikki, please do so. You just unmute and just start chatting. No formality here. Um, but yeah, I think storytelling is not something that comes easy to people. Like how you were saying that um, instead of saying 15 out of 20 users did something, say what the impact is, like what is the insight. And
Hmm.
when I try to like think about that, I think the default nature of a researcher is to say, this has happened, this is what happened.
Yeah.
But it's like going further and saying, this is what happened, and therefore the way
Yeah.
it actually impacts is this, and bring that forth first.
Yeah, hugely. I because like it's interesting. So I have a website. A lot of us have websites. A lot of us have like portfolios or websites where we talk about our work. Now, if somebody went on, let's say somebody totally random went on your website and they were like, wow, these pain points. Um, like your contrast is super bad on your website, or, I can't really find what I'm looking for um, on your website. You're kind of like, okay. Like there are things that we encounter where we act exactly like our stakeholders act when faced with research that isn't tied back to something that is like easily relatable for them. And like to be completely honest, I don't blame them if I sit there saying, 5 out of 7 people failed this task. I, and so
Yeah.
what? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that imply? And should people kind of like care? Yeah, 100%. People should care. People should naturally care about that most of the people failed a task. Yes, obviously, we don't want to make crappy products. Our stakeholders should naturally be like, "Oh wow, that's not good. I wonder what could happen there." People just unfortunately don't always have the capacity to do that, right? Just like when a product manager comes to you and is like, you have to fill out this like stupid requirements doc. And you're sitting there being like, why? Why do I have to do like for what? What's the purpose? You should do it because documentation is important, but you want to know why you have to do it still. So yeah, it is important for us to bring that context. Um, I also just wanted to say, because Donna made a really, well, first, Amber made a really good point that toxic workplaces suck, and you should not blame user research for toxic workplaces. So I completely agree. I've been in many toxic workplaces, and there was nothing that I could do. So that is a very separate issue. But Donna brought up also a great issue of the challenge of UX theater. So decision makers picking the research results that support their preconceived ideas. I actually dealt with this a lot when I still do a little bit. But what I learned to do is with stakeholders or decision makers who tend to do this, I no longer put anything positive in reports.
Mm.
So I will not put anything, I used to be like, okay, here are like the pain points, the unmet needs, and here are some things that went well. If I do that if I find stakeholders being like, it went well, I won't put one single positive thing in a report. And I try and hammer home the things that because like, what's the point of us being like, hey, we did it, we did one thing, like I just don't put anything that they can cherry pick, put 3 terrible things and force them to cherry pick the worst, the least worst thing, but at least they're cherry picking something that's worth solving. So a lot of the times I don't put positives in a research report.
Wow.
What I do say is I do shout out to the team when they've been helpful in shaping the research that's been impactful. That's what I will say is I will hugely shout out like thank you so much to this person for like sharing the research goals and for sharing the metrics and for making sure that this research was super impactful, super important, super intentional. I will definitely shout out those things, but if there's cherry pickers, they won't have anything to cherry pick. So I'm a mean researcher is literally what it's become. Um, yeah, Erica said positive news is helpful for V1 MVP testing. I mean, yeah, I still tend to say like if it's positive, there's nothing that we can and should do about it. So I always say I'm just highlighting what we should change. If I haven't highlighted that we should change it, then it doesn't need to be changed, essentially. So yeah, I hope that that's helpful.
I think it's very helpful. I think it's even I think for me too, I tend to want to give kudos to the team, especially the design team,
Yeah.
because I can see that they work super hard and they're working under the
Yeah.
same kind of pressure that I am. But yeah, I think there's a trade-off there. Like if stakeholders grab on to just the good things that went well and just kind of socialize that and not those things that need to be worked on. I think that's a waste of research.
Yeah, it is because you might as well have not done that presentation or done the research. One thing that you can kudos is the effort that everybody put in to create the assets for the test. That's another thing. But like, no, I'm gonna say something kind of mean. Nobody's ever congratulated me for doing bad research. So why should I congratulate anybody for creating something that actually wasn't helpful for the user? Right? So it's also about like making sure that the kudos is going towards something that makes sense. And I'm a huge proponent. I love my teams, even my consultancy teams. I've been with one for 6 months, and it's coming up to the end of our time because I was covering for somebody on maternity leave, and she's coming back, and I'm so sad. I don't want to leave that team, and I've done plenty of shout outs, and they're actually a really great team where I coach them to not cherry pick. So I hope my researcher, when she comes back, will be very happy to see that. But yeah, I think that it's important to still do kudos, just kudos the right thing.
Sure. Well, we
I have
have,
a question. Oh,
yeah,
quick
go ahead.
question.
Yes.
I'm new to the UX field and I've just um, finished one of my projects. And the next project I do want to start is a fintech related mobile app. But I was just wondering, like, because I have no experience or any knowledge about any fintech related apps, how would you go about it, just like starting from scratch, like a solo project? And thank you for the talk, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Great question. And great that you're kind of like getting out there in something new. Um, what's one thing that's great about user research is that you don't necessarily need to have a deep expertise in every industry that we're doing research in. So, as a consultant, I've done research in doing legal tech right now, and I've done medical tech. I am not a doctor, nor am I a lawyer. One thing that I would say is um, based on what you're thinking about doing, look at similar things, like similar software in the area and or in that industry, and try and understand like, okay, these are the general like trends of fintech. And what I would recommend doing actually is like taking some of that software and you could do a heuristic evaluation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but if you Google heuristic evaluations, you will get plenty of information on that. But do a few heuristic evaluations on software that you can get a hold of that's similar to what you would be interested in doing, because that will show you kind of like patterns and trends in terms of like what these softwares are doing. So I would just get like knowledgeable on that space and then try and understand from those like similar softwares what kind of people are using them so that you can get an idea of like the types of users that you might want to reach out to with this kind of information. So I hope that that's helpful. That's kind of like how I would start thinking about it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, we are at time. I know it's late for you, Nikki, but thank you so much for doing this for the community. We all greatly appreciate it. And everything that you said today was like pretty much like I don't know how many thousands of things that I learned. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
teaching me that. I'm sure it'll help me with my career in general. So, from me and from my chapter and from everybody at Interaction Design Foundation, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And Neha, thank you so much for bringing me on. I was very happy to be able to do this and happy to hear that it was, yeah, insightful. So I will share the slides with you, and I will also share the link to the impact tracker for everybody.
Yep. Okay. Sounds very good. I'll send out the recording and all the resources about in a week or so. So, yeah. All right.
Perfect.
Have a great rest of your day or night, everyone. Thanks for coming. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.